Hello, welcome to my parental alienation journey, focusing on what I can control and living my best life. Thanks for tuning into today's episode. My name's Glenn Sollers, and today I want to talk about something that I heard on a Joe Rogan episode, and he had a guest named Johann Hari, and Johann Hari is an expert in extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. And I found that this topic ties in very well to the topic of parental alienation. First of all, intrinsic motivation is those things that you do on your own, your hobbies, things that bring value to yourself, but it's done internally. So an example would be when I go mountain biking, the love I have for myself, being able to relax and meditate and be on my own and not need anything from the outside to penetrate inwards to make me feel content, happy. I am just motivated internally. I'm living my sense of purpose, having fun. Extrinsic motivation is where I rely on others to be motivated, to feel good about myself. And what he says is that we are moving to more of an extrinsic nature through social media, like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, where we're portraying this image of who we are so that we're showing the world, this is who I am, which makes us feel good. But then we're relying on others for self-satisfaction. Why do I bring this up, and how does this have to do with parental alienation? Well, first of all, there's one thing I want to talk about, and that is thanks to Maddie on the Anti-Alienation Project. If you have not watched her videos, watch them. It's from a child's perspective. I'm speaking from an adult's perspective on parental alienation, and she does an incredible job making me more aware of what does a child go through, such as, and she mentioned this in one of her episodes, that she learned now that she has a relationship with her father after 20 years of alienation, that a lot of what her mother was saying to her, such as your dad's a narcissist, he's gaslighting you, he's manipulating you, he only thinks about himself, all these labels that your child is coming up with about you is actually a projection from the alienating parent. They're a narcissist. They're gaslighting the child. They are selfish. They're only thinking about their own insecurities and feeling good about themselves, because without that child, they would be helpless. So the child is almost like a life support system for the parent. And in order to keep that life support system going on, you have to feed it negative energy about the other parent, that they're all bad and you're all good. Now, when I look at that from an extrinsic motivation perspective, being an alienated parent, losing a child is so tough. So when and if you're going through this, it's important to consider, what can I do to motivate myself and not be dependent on an extrinsic factor such as my child's love for me? And you know what? Hopefully they still love you. You never know, but they're not allowed to love you right now. And that's a good way of looking at it. The love's there. They can't do it. One day they'll get it, and then they'll need you to be there for them. So instead of focusing on those extrinsic factors, or even like when you talk about your child and the lack of a relationship and you hear other people talking about their children, it can be very difficult because we're not getting that recognition of who we are as an amazing individual and as an amazing parent, because the child's not having any part of us. So we have to kind of turn off the extrinsic factors and look within yourself. What have I learned from this experience? What can I better in myself? What can I focus in on that's going to give me gratification? So it's a great opportunity to turn off the external world and seeking recognition from the external world and looking within yourself. And what can I do to build a stronger me, because ultimately it's you. It's nobody else. And I heard this once, where sometimes we think we are so important to this world and we're not. We think we're more important to others than we really are. Of course, we're important in their life, and that's not what I'm not saying you're not important. But what I am saying is people really don't care that much. They're focused so much on their own life and living their best life and doing the best they can, that extrinsic motivation is not important. Like, I'm not out there looking at other people's Facebook posts and getting jealous anymore. Like, look what they're doing, because that takes me away from my own life. And he, on Joe Rogan's podcast, really shares a lot about this, how we are taking videos of things, photos of things. We're talking about how important we are and what we're doing, and we post that on social media, and how we get nothing from that other than feeling that we're more important and we're getting that external recognition, where likely people don't really care. So, as an alienated parent, what are some things you can do? And I listened to one of his books. It was a recap of the book, and he talks about different factors that impact our level of intrinsic motivation. And actually, if we don't have some of these, it can cause depression. And he's an advocate that depression is not going to be resolved through drugs that are prescribed to you. In fact, if you use SSRIs, you might actually have to use more and more, because dosages will become less effective, and then you end up becoming reliant on the drug versus being reliant on yourself. So I'm going to share a bit from his book that he wrote, and what are some things that one can do to increase your intrinsic motivation, and what are some causes of depression. Because for sure, being alienated, I went through bouts of what I believe are depression. It's a very lonely feeling going through alienation. And this doesn't only apply to people who are going through alienation or who are being alienated. This can apply to everybody. And one thing he says is one of the main causes of depression is a troubling event. Something happens, and that leads us into a troubling event. And the way I like to look at that is our brain likes to predict and control what's going on. And it has a certain pathway that it follows, and we form habits. Something happens that really impacts that habitual pattern, that we are going down this route, and then all of a sudden, my child says, I don't want to see you anymore. And he doesn't. That's not what I expected. That was not my vision. That's not what my brain created. So that's what a trauma is that it disrupts your neurology and says, life is not what you thought it was going to be. And it changes. Now, with these traumatic events, there's things that you can do, such as seeing a therapist and talking about your life circumstances. The one thing I want to highlight here, and I've heard this from several different places, and also I was involved in Clear Beliefs coaching and different self-awareness programs, is if you are struggling with something in your life and you're blaming it on your life circumstances, or this is just the way it is, if you take the time to go down a bit deeper and find the event that might have altered the way you think about yourself and the way you see the world, and go back to that event and somehow relive it, acknowledge it, consider from a child's perspective, what message did I tell myself? What did I make this mean? And how am I living into that now as an adult? That awareness allows you to start fixing things and moving forward. So to really look at your life circumstances, the physiological impact it might be having on you now, such as, and this is quite common, weight gain, depression, physical symptoms, abuse of some sort of substance, as an example. These are things that could be looked at and figuring out, well, what do I do now? Another cause of depression is disconnect from people. And the way I kind of read this was it's important to have deep connection with others. Jordan Peterson, love him or hate him, in the 12 Rules of Life, one thing he says is that a friend, and I like to even say community, is somebody that's there for you, that they will help you out. They're there when you need them. They will support you. They'll call you on your shit. They are there through and through. Versus what I see is people who have endless friends everywhere, 1,000 followers. Those are just people, you know. But a true friend, and if you can build these connections, goes a long way in living a happier life, getting support out there. I teach a course called Leading Self with Emotional Intelligence. And one thing that I love about the course is just the support people provide each other and realizing that we all go through our stuff in life and we can ask each other for help. This level of vulnerability and authenticity where you're not just trying to fake out on life and living inauthentic, where you're actually building human to human connections. And sometimes it's not all good stuff, and that's okay. And sometimes it's not all bad stuff. But to have a good balance of the two, I think, goes a long way. And when it comes to alienation, I've had to do that. I've had to really rely on a lot of my friends, my family members, people on social media, learning about what I can or cannot do. Like, this is building a stronger community. Me advocating for parental alienation and how to support yourself through this journey. This is so important that we connect as a community. We don't have to do life alone. Another one he mentions is a disconnect from meaningful values can cause depression. He mentions a lot about our consumer-driven society, how we're looking to buy. We need this, we need that, and then we want to show other people what we have. And that is short-lived. It is extrinsic. It's not intrinsic. We may think, oh my God, it's making me feel good, but that feeling is going to go away very shortly. And the analogy I like to use is a long time ago, I wanted a BMW Z4 for those in the United States. And I was telling my wife that I really want this car. So what I did is I went to a used car dealership that had one for sale. And I drove it. I test drove this vehicle. Had the top down, went down the road, and it was just a car. I pulled back into the dealership and I was done. I did what I wanted to do. It felt good. I don't need one. This is the kind of thing, is trying to make ourselves look better, which is great, or wearing fashionable clothes, which is great, but it can get to overkill. And if you're doing it to please other people or to look impressive, that's a whole different story. Now, mind you, we do have to dress sometimes to impress, especially depending on the job we're in. I cannot stand in front of a group of people with shorts and a ripped t-shirt on and get their attention likely. I will probably get their attention, but it's likely negative attention. However, consumerism can go pretty far and we lose meaningful values like the value we see in ourselves. And I think this is a big part of alienation. For me, I have a strong value of care, compassion, and being an amazing father and integrity. And alienation completely violated all of those, where alienation is based on lies, mistruths, manipulation of data. Huge hit. And I think that's why I went into a quasi-depression and I was anxious, because it's hard for me to live with people who are lying. How can people live through that? We see this in politicians as well. What kind of message are they spreading when they're lying about things? And then we pay them money to run the government. It makes no sense to me. That can lead into depression for sure. So if we want to reduce depression, is start looking at me. What is my value? What do I bring? How can I live my value? How do I live on purpose? What's possible here? And refocusing on myself. Maybe it's a hobby that brings out a certain value. For me, there's a value of teaching others and showing the way. Hence, I am a facilitator for a living. I do training. So what can you do? How can you realign your values to a greater purpose so you don't get value out of being extrinsically motivated, that you're getting value of something that you do? Like my grandmother, she was alone for years. She lost her husband in the Second World War, got remarried, then she lost her second husband, and she spent most of her life alone. But she wasn't alone. She was with her value of resilience, of doing what you can in life, and she ended up spending much of her time knitting sweaters for the less fortunate people out there. And she made carpets. She did different things. And that's what she did all day, was just knit. And that was her thing. And she was so happy and content in life. The other one that he talks about is a disconnect from nature. Status and a lack of respect can lead to depression. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm so fortunate that I made the choice of moving to an area where I'm just looking at my window right now where everything's just green, different shades of green. It's so peaceful. Love it. Now, we all don't have this opportunity or privilege. And I want to acknowledge that I do have this privilege. And we all have forests nearby. But I think what this translates for me is we are also killing off that brings peace to this world, that creates a balance in nature through overconsumption, through burning carbon, all these different things. And yes, we need it. And yes, I'm not willing to stop traveling, and I'm doing my part to destroy this environment, but to do our best to try to maintain it and treat it with respect. But if we're not being respected by other people, if we don't respect other people, if we complain about other people, if we're not acknowledged in our work, if people don't recognize us, if we don't recognize ourselves, if we take things personally, this all, in my opinion, can lead to depression. And alienation is part of that as well. There's a disconnect in alienation from your nature that you helped create, this child. Of course, that's going to cause some pain and some grief. You lost your status as a parent. You've been eliminated, essentially, from that child's life, which is totally disrespectful, doesn't follow the law and order that we have in this country and other countries. It's not in the best interest of the child. It violates almost every human right. Your right as a parent. And I would love to take this to the world court about how this is a violation of human rights, where a child is granted the power at a young age when they don't know the consequences. And this is psychological abuse. So that's how it connects there. Another thing he talks about is that it's important to realize that we can change the way we think. We have neuroplasticity. That, yeah, we might have been through a terrible time, and that's okay. We will make it. We're here today. We've gotten this far. We've survived whatever life threw at us, and we keep on going on. One effort that I'm trying to really incorporate into my life after being alienated for 7-8 years is, and I'm just starting this now, and I should have started it earlier, was to catch myself in my negative thinking and focus on what I can control, my positive thinking. Like even with my son, and I'm not going to ever stop thinking about him, but to remember the good times we've had, to remember the benefit that you brought into your child's life, the benefit I brought into my son's life. And then one day when we hopefully reconnect, we can talk about all that stuff, because when I do hear him on his podcast, he's a lot like me. He likes to advocate. He likes to influence. He likes to be vulnerable and open. Like, those are gifts that I brought him. And the funny thing is, though, when he's on his podcast, he doesn't do that with his mom. He doesn't have an open relationship. He can't speak up to his mom. Alienation has a lot to do with fear. And I've been fearful for a great part of my life. What is the emotion in you that is stopping you from living your best life? What do you need to let go of? I need to let go of fear. I need to accept myself. I need to recognize that for my entire life, I've looked at extrinsic factors to feel validated, to feel loved, to feel like I belong. And this journey of self-awareness, I'm learning I don't need all that. I need to love myself. I need to learn from life, live my life, enjoy my community, live my purpose, which I'm doing through my work that I do, through this podcast, spend time alone, not ruminate over stuff all the time, which I tend to do, is to catch myself in these negative patterns and focus on me, focus on my wife, focus on my community, focus on nature, all these other things. Build a stronger you. I have stopped checking Facebook to a great extent. I am not on Instagram. I'm not on Snapchat. I trying to focus on doing things that improve me, such as speaking Spanish, things that I've always wanted to do, singing lessons. I love singing, having fun, telling jokes, all this stuff, versus trying to find a sense of gratification, a sense of security, a sense of I'm good enough by going out there and trying to prove myself. Folks, thanks for listening.